the Son. Amen. Good and gracious God, who loves and delights in all people, we stand in awe before you, knowing that the spark of life within each person on earth is the spark of your divine life. Differences among cultures and races are multicolored and manifestations of your life. May our hearts and minds be open to celebrate similarities and differences among our sisters and brothers. We place our hopes for racial harmony in our committed action and in your presence and our name. May all peoples live in peace. Amen. Father and Son. So just a few house rules, particularly for today. Yes, this meeting will be recorded, and I would like, with a sense of pride, to say that this is the furthest that we've been collectively, that we've traveled collectively as a community, our journey for transformation, and that we are today going to be presented by two of our own community members who have come forward to help us in our journey, giving comfortable space that we can be in. With that, I would like to note as well that this is a safe space. If there are any things that have been discussed that perhaps you are comfortable with, yes, if we are able to assist, that would like us to, in that process, maintain a sense of respect, kindness, and compassion towards each other. Because even though we may not agree with each other, still be civil and kind. And with that, I would like to hand over to Marelise. Please, good luck to the both of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucious. So for those who don't know me, my name is Marelise, and I will tell you a little bit about myself in a moment. But I just wanted to start off by saying that Will and I are really nervous about this presentation this evening. And the reason is because it is such an emotive topic. It doesn't matter what racial group you fall into, everybody's got an opinion on this, and we are well aware of that. But the point of the evening is not to heap any more burden or guilt onto anybody's shoulders. That's not what we're here for. We would like to just present some information, and we hope that you're able to take something from it and that you're able to then use it in your dealings with people from other racial groups. And we hope that it will bring a greater interpersonal relationships, in your environment. So the other thing that I wanted to say is that obviously Will and I are both white, so we speak about race from a white perspective, and we cannot speak to it from any other perspective. So please just keep that in mind as we are talking. All right, so a little bit about myself. I am a De La Salle mom. I have got 2 children at the junior school and 1 at home with me. I'm a teacher by training, and but I'm at home with my children at the moment. The reason why I think that I was asked to present today to issues of diversity, and so I think they thought they better put my money where my mouth is. But in reflecting on where I started, I was a young teenager when the system of apartheid came to an end, and I very clearly recall, a bit nervous. They were very they felt it was a very positive thing for our country, and they spoke very positively about it. So I entered into this new South Africa very positive and proudly South African, and very racially aware. But by the time I was a young adult, I naively believed that racism had all but ended, and we were shopping in the same shops with me. They had the same opportunities as me. So I kind of thought that was the end of that. But when I got married, I and ended living in the middle of in a little town called Lime Acres. And when I arrived there, I was really faced with the true reality of what was happening in South Africa spoken about. You, even if you went to the butcher, had to stand in 2 different queues. There was a queue for the white people, and there was a queue for the black people. So I was shocked at what I had, at what I was presented with. But as any self-respecting white little young lady from the city would do, I started to ruffle some feathers, and I would go and stand in the black queue in the butchery, and I would insist that they served the black people that were standing in front of me, and this really flustered everybody's feathers. I would challenge people if they referred to grown black men as boy. So I was really active in standing up family, and there's nothing like children to really make you realize that you don't know anything about life. And we started to engage around this issue again when people started to ask us, well, are you guys going to immigrate? Are you staying here? You shouldn't stay here. You should take your children out of the country. And so we found ourselves in a position where we didn't want to leave South Africa. We wanted to stay here. We wanted to bring our children up in this country. But we also felt like we couldn't just carry on as we'd always carried on. We needed to make a difference and, you know, really engage with what was happening around us. I believe you're losing me. So we joined a church that was multicultural, and we started to really engage around the issues of diversity and transformation. And we attended a conference the one year, which was speaking specifically around racism. And it was really there that you know, a mirror was put up to my face in the realization that racism does not only occur in racism, but actually it can be more unconscious, and that we all actually have racist tendencies within us. So I started to delve into my racial history, where I grew up. I went and chatted to my parents, asked them a little bit about where they came from racially, what their parents were like racially, and I was really just faced with the fact that I was turning off my video. Is this better?
Not you, Marelise, the participants, sorry.
Okay, let's try it. Keep going.
So, you know, I was really faced with the fact that I was, you know, a white girl growing up in a white school, in a white area, going to white churches, interacting with white doctors, and living in a time where the system benefited white people. And so all of those things, you know, came together to make me realize that my whiteness was a part of who I was and a part of the way that I viewed the racial things that were going on around me. And so that was really the time that I started to explore and engage. I started to listen to people of other colors. I started to really seek out friends of color, to really challenge myself racially so that I wasn't only viewing everything from a white perspective, but I was gaining some other perspectives as I was, engaging with my own whiteness. And so that's kind of where it's brought me to today. I like to engage around the issues. I like to learn. And it's a journey. I'm still learning. I haven't arrived. There's still lots to learn when you engage with people from other racial groups, especially if that's not how you've been brought up. And so that's part of my journey. So that's me for now. I'm going to hand over to Will, and he can tell us a little bit about himself.
Sorry, I've got two screens running at the moment. I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing. So my name is Will Vernell. A lot of you will know me from seeing me wandering around the school. I'm a father of two, also a DLSA CCJ parent. So my boys are both here with me. One's in grade R and one's in grade 3. I'm an engineer by training, worked in the wine trade in London for 10 years, and I'm now teaching your children. Sorry for you guys. But also I'm an Englishman abroad. So one of the things that struck me when I moved to South Africa was just how village-like one of the biggest cities in the world is. There are large amounts of little towns within the city. And it's something that really struck me. And initially, not having been kind of aware of apartheid, mainly because of my age, and secondly, because I grew up in the UK, where most of the history they teach you is about how England conquered the world and got bloody noses occasionally. I didn't really have an understanding, and to be honest, I still don't have a great understanding, as much as I'm trying to read and learn about what occurred in this country over the years. So my point of view comes from an outsider looking in, but instead of an outsider looking in, it's more like a kid at the candy store window, trying desperately to figure out what's going on, how I can be part of the candy store, and where we can go from here to get to everyone being inside the candy shop. And basically, I'm journeying to learn as much as I can to make the world a better place. And I think when I was at the high school, I joined the transformation and diversity group of students there as the teacher in charge. And they actually opened my eyes to just how active the youth of this country And I think as a teacher, it's incredibly important to make sure that everyone involved everyone that is involved with you is aware of where you stand and aware that you are on a learning curve. The reality is we will learn as much from our children as we will ever teach our children. And I think it's important to listen to their voices and to amplify their voices when necessary. Before I move on, I found a new toy on Google Meet, which apparently allows me to poll people. So I'm going to try that with a couple of questions to start off with. If it doesn't work, I'll give up on that and I'll move on quickly. But let's just give this a little go. So I've got 3 questions that I'm putting out. Can anyone see the question? I don't know where it would appear on your screen. Has it appeared on anybody's screen?
No, Will.
Yes, no, maybe?
Yes, it's appeared on mine.
Well, if I can jump in there, on some folks' screens, etc., it might appear next to the icon for chat. It'll come up as a triangle, a square, and a circle. So folks just have a look at that. And then they'll see that you've got breakout rooms, polls, and Q&A as well.
Mr. Meyer has obviously played with this toy before.
And then your first question of the poll, Will, is do you think that you are privileged?
Indeed.
How much time you giving your participants to take part?
No, I'm going to give them another couple of seconds, and then we're gonna move on.
All right. Thank you, everybody. When you're done, maybe you can just respond in the chat. 3 questions, you said.
3 questions, but we will run them at different stages through this conversation. So it looks as though if we take the quick straw poll, for those that have found it, out of 27 votes, to the question, do you think you are privileged? 24 have said yes, and 3 have said no. So to me, that's quite interesting, and I think it's something that we'll steer back to. And on that note, I'm hoping you guys can all see this cartoon. If it's too small, I will read it out to you. Can anybody see?
We can, but perhaps read out because the font is a little bit too small.
Okay. So if we start at the top left, we've got a little man holding a Black Lives Matter sign. And then somebody comes and joins him in the screen. The question is, actually all lives matter. To which the man holding the sign sighs and responds, of course all lives matter, dude. The point of the phrase is that black lives are being treated as expendable by the police and the government that employs them. If someone says save the rainforest, you don't respond with actually save all rainforests, do you? Just because we need to save the rainforest doesn't mean other forests have no value. It's just one needs our focus right now because the situation is out of control. And he thinks for a second and says, I guess I've never really thought of it that way before. But if I change my mind now, doesn't that make me a hypocrite? And the response is, nope, it means you're growing as a person. And then they go off together agreeing with each other with regards to Black Lives Matter. And the reason I like this, escaped. The reason I like this cartoon is because of the sentence, nope, it means you're growing as a person. As we progress and as we gain knowledge, we grow as people. When it comes to the conversation based around privilege, the problem with privilege is that often we don't know we have it because it is our normal. And if you have been vehemently against the idea of privilege, and as you learn more, change your mind about where you sit in the hierarchy of privilege, it doesn't mean you're a hypocrite that previously you have been railing against that conversation. It shows that you are growing as a person. And with the knowledge you have gained, you are moving forward into a different space on your journey. So that for me is, I love that comic book, I love that comic, but now I'm going to pass it on to Marelise.
Right, so we just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page going forward, because we are going to refer to some terms, and we wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page as we do so. So the first term is prejudice, which is a prejudgment about another person based on social groups to which a person belongs. Prejudices consist of thoughts and feelings, generalizations that usually are based on little or no experience. We are all, as humans, prejudiced. We all hold some sort of prejudice. So some of our prejudices may be towards other people of different genders, ages, social classes, races, those sorts of things. So an example of a prejudice would be perhaps that you feel Australians can't play rugby. That would be a prejudice. Or you may feel that people over a certain age is past their prime. Then you are prejudiced against their age. All right, so then the next one would be discrimination. And this is an action based on prejudice. So an action would be something like ignoring, excluding, threatening, ridiculing, slandering, and perhaps even being violent towards somebody or a group of people. Generally, discriminatory actions are very clear and recognizable. And it may, following on from my other example, is if you were prejudiced against Australians playing rugby, you might exclude an Australian from your rugby game. If you were prejudiced towards people over a certain age, you may choose not to hire that person. That would be a discriminatory action. All right, then the next one would be bias. This is a natural preference towards or against something. Everybody, again, has biases. If you are like me, you might be biased towards the game of hockey, because what's not to love about hockey? But attitudes and stereotypes that we unconsciously attribute to other people or groups, those are our unconscious biases. They are the biases that we don't know where they lie. So, for example, you may not realize that you have an unconscious bias about women not being very good at technology, and so you do not trust them with it. That would be your unconscious bias. And then we take things a little bit further, and we're going to look at racism. Racism takes things further because this is where we refuse to acknowledge a person's rights or their dignity or their value because of the group that they're part of. So the most obvious example of this would be the system of apartheid, where the law backed the prejudice against the people of color. So it is normally a law-based structure. Racism can be structural, which is in the case of apartheid. So the racism is embedded throughout our society across all fields, such as education, employment, wealth, healthcare, entertainment, any field that you might find in a nation. That would be structural racism. Institutional racism would occur in large institutions like schools and companies, where they create unfair discriminatory policies. An example of that would be banks affording loans to certain race groups and not others. Interpersonal racism would occur between individuals. So a racist slur towards another person, or perhaps even an act of xenophobia, would constitute interpersonal racism. And then internalized racism is when an individual accepts the societal racist norms. So what happens is that individuals take on the belief systems that some racial groups are more superior than others. And it does not always have to be the superior group that takes that on. Now, it's important to note that all of these judgments and attitudes are socially constructed. They are part of the society in which you live, and most often you are born into the society which has already grouped people according to social structures. So before you may even realize that you are part of a racist system or a prejudiced society, you've already been given the message that people belong to different groups and some groups are better than others. And that's really important to note as we go forward when we try to unpack what it means to be white. So We are going to start then with a little video that you guys can watch, and then we'll chat afterwards.
Hey, line up! Line up! Everybody line up! We're about to race. Everybody line up. Shoulder to shoulder. Take off your backpacks. Basketball, line up. We're about to race. Hey, we are racing for a $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this. A $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm going to make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability, you don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I have said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the lead that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go! If you didn't learn anything from this activity, you're a fool.
So I'm sure a lot of you will have seen this seen this little clip before. It's been bandied around for a number of years, but I think it still bears a huge relevance to us today. It really shows that before people started moving and before they turned around, they were very unaware of the things that were going on in other people's lives and just unaware of their stories. Which leads me on to a quote from my favorite movie. I know it's a bit cliche, but it is what it is. So, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he did not exist. And this applies to our privilege in a lot of ways. Because the difficulty we have as we exist in the world is our privileges become our normal. You don't see your privilege because that's just how the world is from your perspective. Until you hear stories of how other people are living or have been affected by any form of privilege, you tend not to understand. So privilege is the trick that doesn't exist. It is very difficult to look within yourself and honestly open up to yourself and to other people about where your privileges lie. Because it's very personal, and because it feels like normal to you, how do you attack your normal? What happens when you attack your normal? So, this is the word we are talking about. It's a big, scary word. But first, let's break it down. Oh, I've gone backwards. What Marelise and I are talking about is supposed to challenge your preconceptions. As I've just stated, life as you know it is your normal. So in order to understand your privilege, you have to challenge your preconceptions about what is normal. Normal isn't the same for everybody. Normal changes based on a huge number of things. But what we are talking about is supposed to challenge your preconceptions. Marelise, do you want to say something there? Some of this content may be difficult or upsetting to hear because we are working at chipping away on your understanding of normal comparatively to the rest of the world. We want you to stay engaged. Part of the problem historically has been that the fragility of the human psyche means that when we hear things we don't like, or we don't want to hear, or we feel as though we should disagree with, people shut down and run away, or they shout louder. There is no intention here to offend. What we're trying to do is we're trying to put across things that we have learned in our journeys as we read more and as we engage more with various topics based around a variety of things in order to try and help us understand the world better. And everything we are saying comes from a place of love. To be honest, as Marelise said earlier, the prospect of sitting here and talking about privilege and white privilege in particular is a terrifying concept because it is now a hugely emotive phrase. We were called to do this, and I think it comes from the desire to make our world a better place. And I feel, well, hopefully, I do feel, and I hope that everyone agrees, is that we're all here on this meeting because that's what we want as well. Now, when we talk about privilege, it's not saying that you are prejudiced or bigoted. So we're not attacking you as individuals. I'm not going to pull anyone out of this lineup of 70 odd people and say, I think you're bigoted. This is a learning curve. We're learning together, and we're going to explore what our biases are and how we can work together to change how we think about certain things. We are not saying everyone is at fault for all historical wrongs. If we were, I come from the UK, we historically wandered around the world, burnt stuff, pillaged stuff, and wandered off. Obviously, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but I wasn't even a dream at the point where a lot of these atrocities were being perpetrated. So whilst I can feel empathy for those people that were there at the time, I know that me sitting here today couldn't have done anything to change history to make them not happen, as much as I would love to. So this is not a case of blaming white people for current white people for the atrocities that have happened long ago. If you are white and still committing atrocities, then you do have a problem, because that's something you should be able to change and shouldn't be perpetrating at the moment. And one of the things that is really important to say is that privilege doesn't mean that in your normal you haven't worked in just how much work it takes to get yourself to a place where you feel happier. Whether it's being a good dad, or whether it's having a certain size bank account, or whether it's having a nice house, no one is denying how hard you have worked in your normal to get to where you are today. So with that, if it's not those things, then what is it?
All right, so privilege is defined as a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group, often gained by birth, social position, effort, or concession. So we'll let us know where our privileges could lie.
So, gender. If you're looking at genders, and we're just going to talk about cisgender at the moment, so those that identify as the same gender as the body they were born into. Male or female? Historically, males have always been in a position of privilege and power. Were the original people to be able to vote. And no one would deny that feminism is a cause to gain equal rights with men. And then we've got race. I don't think, because of what we're going on to, I don't think we really need to touch too much on race. And I don't feel as though many people here would disagree that the less melanin that one has in their body, potentially the more privilege that they have, as when first seen by another person. Oh, sorry, letting someone into the meeting. Wealth. Now, wealth is the one that I think everybody gets stuck on when they talk about privilege. If you come from a family that can't afford the latest and greatest of everything, then people say, I'm not privileged. Where is my privilege? But wealth is only one of a number of privileges that works on a sliding scale. You may be relatively poor, but still can afford food on the table. But most of the time, there is always going to be someone with less than you. And most of the time, unless you're Jeff Bezos, there will be someone with more than you. So privilege and wealth are very intertwined. And I think we get caught up in the fact that privilege is all about wealth. So we need to try and start removing that from our consciousness. Geographical origin, where you come from. Northern Hemisphere Europeans and Americans have a huge amount of privilege. They wander the world, and if people don't speak English, they shout louder in the vague hope that volume will translate into understanding. Sexuality. Again, if you are heterosexual, you have a level of privilege. As things stand, people are fighting for equal rights, but we're not there yet. And religion. Now, this is a sticky one, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, as a general rule, Christian people have slightly more privilege than a lot of other religions. We know that Judaism has been persecuted for thousands of years, and the recent rhetoric surrounding Muslim terrorism now means that a lot of our Muslim brothers and sisters are also at the wrong end of the stick when it comes to conversations and when it comes to privilege. So for me, those are like the big six.
Well, how many of these boxes do you tick?
Yeah, I'm all of them, hey? So I am the pinnacle of a privileged human being. I am male. I am Christian. My parents worked very hard to educate me at a private school. I am heterosexual, and I come from the UK. These things give me a level of privilege that not many people enjoy. And for me, that was one of the hardest things about this journey, was as I went through the list of privileges and started ticking them off and thinking, okay, wow, what do I do? How do I go about using my privileges to give back to the world? The world has given me so much. How do I give back? And yeah, if anyone can figure that out, please let me know, because I am still working through it, and I will be for quite some time, I think.
All right, we are running out of time, so we're going to try and get through as much as we can. All right, so here we get into the nitty-gritty of things. White privileges are the advantages that are taken for granted by white people and cannot be similarly enjoyed by people of color and in the same context. So I've placed this picture here which is a picture that's done the rounds, and I'm sure many of you have seen it, but this is really the reality of South Africa. We know that there's a disproportionate white elite living in relative comfort in well-located spaces and areas. But we also know that the Black South Africans are confined to urban peripheries in dense and poorly serviced settlements. Despite the fact that we have been out of a segregated system for 20 odd years, this is still the case in South Africa. Stats SA records high levels of unemployment in which Black Africans have the worst employment outcomes and the lowest wages, whereas white people earn considerably higher than all other racial groups. The Children's Institute Child Gauge in UCT in 2019 contains that 2/3 of Black children live in a household with no parents. 65% of Black children in South Africa live in poverty, 31% of colored children and 16% of Indian children live in poverty, and only 3% of white children live in poverty. Those stats say a lot. But I'm not saying this tonight to make you feel even more guilty or more ashamed. Again, I want to re-emphasize that we are not saying that this is your fault or our fault. This is the legacy that we have been left with. And the question is, what do we do with it all? Because in reality, we form part of a larger system and we have benefited from the system. And so that is why we are talking about this tonight. All right. So, what does it mean to be white in South Africa? The first thing is that if you are white, it is easy to belong. Whiteness rests on the foundational premise that white people are the norm or the standard for humanity. So in being white, we belong to the norm. Now, when we got tired of walking around our suburb during lockdown, which I'm sure a lot of you can identify with, I decided that I'd take a trip down to the Rampart Golf Course and have a walk around there. I do not have a membership at the golf course, but I kind of figured if anybody looked at me, they probably would think that I belonged there. Why? Because of the color of my skin. So this brings us to the next one, freedom of movement. White people are free to move into any space and be seen as normal, neutral, or valuable. We can do anything without having to worry about our race, and we pose no physical threat to others, and so we are accepted the world over. A lot of our white South Africans are reaping the benefit of their skin as they are able to relocate to many parts of the world and find themselves belonging because of their skin. And the next one is that white people are free from the burden of their race. We are not socialized to see ourselves in racial terms. There's no parent or teacher who is telling a white child that they need to behave in a certain way because they're white. We don't have to worry about how others see our race. We don't worry about our race being held against us. And in fact, if we're tired of talking about race, we just don't. It's very easy to forget about our whiteness. And white people can also just be people, you know, without our race interfering with who we are. We are seldom referred to as my white friend, and most of our whiteness does not define us in society. If an English teacher says to the class, we're going to read a play about Shakespeare, everybody knows just by not introducing Shakespeare that he's white, whereas if the teacher said, we are going to read a historical novel by a Black author who writes about our culture, already we can see that if you talk about a white person, you don't have to say that they're white, but if we're talking about a Black author, we must talk about them as Black. White people can just be people wherever they are.
So white solidarity harks back to the village living in a big city, the enclaves of whiteness. And a lot of what we see on the television reflects back who we are, what we see in textbooks. The kids will see white kids in textbooks. And it's very easy for us to find role models that we can relate to, because stuff we see coming out of North America and the UK reflects white people. Yeah, sorry, polite. We are going on a little bit, but we feel as though this is quite an important conversation to have. And the other thing is this idea of the good old days. Now, the Oompa Loompa in America is quick to point it out, and so is dear Boris in the UK. And the rise of nationalism all across the world is hugely prevalent. And it's a desire to hark back to days of world conquering, and the idea that people knew their place. But I don't understand what that is, because I still don't know what to be. Still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And it's quite a scary thing that this has been allowed to happen. I'm going to have to excuse myself momentarily. I've just got to go and start recording the junior school public speaking event. So I'm going to put this slide up for you, Marelise, and then hopefully I should be back in time to put the next one up.
No problem. Just play the slide.
Before you proceed, Marelise, I just want to thank everybody who's still online, and if they don't mind, we are running a little bit over time, but we'll try and rein it in a little bit, and that might mean that we may not get to the questions if you have any. So can I ask you to start typing your questions in the comments while the presentation goes, so it can form part of the recording, even though we may not answer all of them, then we can pick up on them in our next session. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Marelise, you may continue, ma'am.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so how does white privilege present itself here in South Africa? So I'm going to start with perfectionism, because there's only one way, and that's the white way. You know, we like to come across as if we're perfect, and that is why it's so often hard for us to accept that our white privilege may be a flaw for us. Our mistakes are seen as personal, and they reflect very badly on a person if you make mistakes. Instead of valuing, learning, and taking the opportunity to uplift people, we often condemn people because they haven't done what they should have done. Time is a Western construct. We are very driven by time and deliverables. Everything must run according to a plan, and we are looking to make ends meet at the end of the day, and we are not in it for community building or equity implementation. We can't take the time to pull others in and make changes because it's all about getting things done. I have to laugh at South African white people who get very offended when they are not considered African until it comes to African time, because no white person identifies with African time. White South Africans are really good at power hoarding. We love to hold on to the power, the jobs, the money, the land, lest a black person comes and steals it out from underneath us. I wonder what it would look like if we could share it all. It's quite a scary thought for us to share the power, which is why we hold on to it so strongly. Western standards of beauty. The Clicks ad is a prime example of this. fair-skinned, youthful, thin, able-bodied, blonde, blue eyes. This is what's considered beautiful, not only in South Africa, but the world over. So all constructs, these constructs are designed to group people and to essentially uphold the status quo. You know, in white dominant culture, either or thinking is very prominent. We tend to think that people are either good or bad. They're either racist or not. There's really no middle ground here, and very little understanding for context or intersectionality, which is why it's so hard for us to adopt this label of white privilege, because it either must be bad or it must be good, and if it's bad, we don't want it. But there's no room to engage around it and see what else there is in it. Another thing that is very clear in white dominant culture is individualism. We are unique, we stand apart, and we believe we can operate outside of social structures of society. We believe that because we are unique, we don't need to be defined by our skin color. But the irony is that the only people who that is afforded to are white people, and that is why we have the privilege. White people are very defensive, let's just be honest. We defend our attitudes, our belief systems, our social standings. We have no room to give or to receive feedback. We defend our high walls, we defend our school choices, we defend our lifestyles, because we're holding on to it for dear life. We also feel that we have the right to live and exist in our comfortable lives. We do not want to be disturbed by the inequalities of others around us. And that is why the EFF is so quick to rattle us, because they just have to mention a little bit of discomfort for white people and we are shaking in our shoes. White people will keep the peace at all costs, including the livelihood, education, and lives of other people. Politeness trumps all. We do not dare to challenge the status quo. We would not challenge a friend on the way they've treated to or spoken to their housekeeper, or the use of they, them to imply that it's not our kind. We make sure that we have this white solidarity and we stick together. And in white dominant culture, we feel like we can be very objective. We feel we are free of all bias, which is why we find this whole white privilege thing very hard to swallow. So all of these characteristics that I've gone through here quickly are characteristics that uphold the system and hold onto the racial control that we have as white people in this country, despite the fact that we are the minority. We will protect our privilege at whatever cost, so that we do not need to lose anything for ourselves.
So I managed to come back. So hopefully nothing goes wrong. And if it does, you'll hear a knocking on the door and I'll run away again. So just quickly, we're going to go through the common feelings that are associated with the term white privilege. And it speaks to buzzwords or buzz phrases again, such as white fragility and white silence, and how when these difficult topics are brought to our attention, how the tendency is to shut them down or just to not engage in them at all. So the common emotional reactions are feeling judged, singled out, shamed, scared, guilty, or personally attacked. All of these cause the recipient of the conversation to lash out. It doesn't work. It doesn't help anyone when they get defensive, which is why we spent such a long time in the introduction trying to explain that this was coming from a place of love. And the behaviors such as denying, leaving, just running away, avoiding conversations such as this, or arguing a point because you're coming from a place of fear. None of it is constructive. And then I'm sure you've all heard these. I can't be racist, I have a black friend. I don't see color. And I think for me, this is one of the more dangerous sentences in the world. Color, for me, is a descriptor. And if you don't see color, you are denying somebody's journey in life. It can't be underestimated how important it is that we see each other for who we are. So before I go off on a rant about that, black people get all the jobs, the BEE myth. I'm not racist, normally followed with a but. Black people are racist. Well, I think probably the less said about that sentence, the better. But these are the kind of outrageous claims that people are making in order to try and defend their position. We hope and we think there's a better way.
Right, so as Will said, we feel like there's a better way, and we wanted to put forward a different narrative towards this defensiveness that we as white people take whenever the conversation of white privilege or racism comes up. So instead of having an emotional reaction, of being defensive, of feeling judged, what if we were open-minded instead? What if we tried to understand, to believe? What if we felt responsible for what was going on, or our lives, the way we lived our lives, and accountable for the privilege that we have? And we would hope that this would lead to behaviors such as participating, engaging around these issues, contemplating what it means to have all this privilege, possibly even repenting, but certainly being part of the process rather than just withdrawing and avoiding. And then hopefully we would make claims more like this. I do see things from a white perspective. I have got unconscious biases. I have not listened enough, and I have benefited from the color of my skin. As soon as we can claim these things, we can change the rhetoric around them. We can start to engage around it, and we can start to learn from other people around us, and hopefully deepen relationships with people of other race groups. So where do we go from here? You know, white dominant culture works really hard to produce and reinforce the dominant narratives of society. You know, one such narrative is that Black people are uneducated in our society. So we take this kind of narrative and then we explain the position of the racial group by saying things like, therefore, because they are uneducated, they cannot hold the same position as white people. But if we recognize our privilege, we are able to better understand the elements that contribute to the inequality that is driven by race. So, for example, historically, white people have been educated and Black people have not. So Black people are playing catch up. And if you understand that, you are able to understand a lot more about how society works around education, job opportunities, and creating opportunities for people who have previously been disadvantaged. So as white people, we really have to explore where we are part of the problem and where we can be part of the solution. So we are going to chat through some practical steps.
Be brave. It takes a lot to own your privileges, because by owning your privileges, you are admitting that you have benefited from things that aren't your fault. And in order to challenge your privileges and remove the barriers from people with less privilege than you, you are attacking your normal. So you will go from a place where you consider normal to a place where you lose a lot of your unconscious comforts. Examine your privilege. Take time to figure out what your privileges are. Privilege comes in so many shapes and sizes that understanding which ones you hold and which ones you can use to benefit society will put you in a place where you can really work towards improving the world we live in. Listen to people of color. Truly listen. There is a tendency to tone police. And what I mean by that is, you can't talk to me like that. You're being too hysterical. I don't understand why you're shouting. I can't listen to you if you're shouting. But the tone of someone's story will generally denote the hurt or the upset that has been involved in the story. And the bravery it takes for them to bring the story to you in a place that they consider safe enough to talk. They must just talk. Whether it's shouting because they're outraged, whether it's crying because they're upset, listen. Don't try and solve the world's problems. As white people, I can't speak for all white people, but as a white man, I know I can't solve the problems of the black population of the world. But I need to listen so I can better understand and better empathize so I can help going forward.
Right. Another thing to do is to start to challenge your biases, particularly your unconscious biases. So we need to expose ourselves to counter stereotyping. Not everything that we see, that we watch, that we engage with should be white. We need to use social media to amplify new voices, listen to people of color, listen to what they have to say, follow pages that are not white-only pages. Don't be defensive. Just listen. As Will said, it's very easy to become defensive because you're trying to defend your normal. But seek diversity in your interactions. When you're at work, when you're at school, at church, don't only socialize with the white people, socialize with different races. Challenge yourself. And have an open mind. Refrain from judging, because we judge too quickly, and it maintains our unconscious biases. And then we need to challenge our racial framing. So your racial framing is how you construct and reinforce your racial messages that you have. So, like Will said earlier, you challenge the use of the word black as being a negative descriptor rather than a neutral one. Often children might refer to a black person as being black, and the parents, quiver because they've used the word black. But the word black is to describe their skin. There's nothing wrong with being black. Challenge your view of white people being the authority on all subjects. This often happens when, for us white people who've been brought up with only white people in authority above us. Rather actively search out doctors, teachers, preachers of color. So that you can experience other racial groups, but so that your children can see you going to professionals who are people of color, and of course include friends of color into your life. They bring a rich diversity into your relationships, and you learn things about yourself that you never thought were there. But of course, the biggest one is to be humble. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to be embarrassed at times. I've said stupid things that I wish I could take back, but it happens. And you need to be humble in these moments, because actually humility goes a long way in healing relationships. So it's very important.
So I'm sure you'll be glad to hear that we will be leaving you with this last slide. And I think you guys can read it for yourself, because I think this, for me, really rounds off where we would like to leave you today. I'm really sorry that we've run so far over time, but I feel as though this conversation is too important to cut off midway. And I know Marelise and myself and the senior management of the college and the board are all very willing to continue this conversation offline and at another stage. And the questions that we've got, I think I'll leave that to Lucious, but if you feel as though you've been here for too long and you need to go and do stuff, then we can always respond to you individually at a later stage.
That's good. No, thank you very much, Will and Marelise. I think you have shown us a different perspective, and also you've helped the college to take that very next step of looking inward and looking at ourselves and ensuring that we are part of the solution. We're not waiting for somebody else to do something, but this is what our contribution needs to be consistently in order for our college and our community to be the best that we deserve. So for that, I thank you, and in agreement with whether the topic had enough time for today or not, I think you can never put a cap on it. So what we can do is we can have a part 2 at a later stage, which will be awesome. But also I'm very happy that we can have a formal, I don't want emotional spillovers. That for me is a clear thing that we need to understand. We're not going to be driven by hurt. We have to be driven by the willingness to understand and heal and move forward. So I don't want people feeling judged and pushed to the corners. So within the same attitude, the part 2 will then take the conversation further, and we can also start looking forward to these questions that have been posted and comments, and packaging them in such a way that perhaps they can also feed into the part 2 to see what it is that we can extrapolate on from the topic. But my humblest thank yous for everybody who stuck around and has seen the discussion and its theme through today. And hopefully we can get more of our community members coming through to share in this very safe space. So I will not ask that we go through the questions. They are posted, it is recorded, but we will take them as our direction for our next discussion on this topic. If everybody's in agreement with that, we can drop off and enjoy the rest of our evening. But thank you very much for being here and adding your presence and your opinions on this matter. This is groundbreaking. Well done. All right. If there's no one else with a comment, I will say bye-bye, and we will chat at a later stage. Thank you very much. Right.
Thank you,
Yes.
everybody.
Thank you.
Mr.
Bye.
Murray.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you. Well done, Marelise. Excellent. Thank you.
I know that folks have obviously had to leave, and for those who are still with us, I'd just obviously like to extend my thanks firstly to Marelise and Will for this afternoon/evening's presentation. I think you've touched on a number of key points, and I think white privilege also is a concept that it's kind of fallen on its own connotations, and I think that's why we see a lot of pushback in that regard. as you've pointed out so eloquently here, that the word white creates discomfort among those who are not used to being defined by their race. And I think the other word, privilege, and especially for poor folk, whether that be city outskirts, rural areas as well, it's a word that doesn't belong to them, and it often suggests that they belong to something that they're not. And I think the defensiveness derails an important conversation, and we can see why it's gone on a little bit longer tonight than originally planned. And unfortunately, but this means that you often have to start with defining what white privilege is not, and I think that's been done brilliantly tonight. It's the suggestion, it's not the suggestion that white people have never struggled, and secondly, it's not the assumption that everything a white person has accomplished has been unearned. And for, again, looking at white privilege in particular, it should be viewed as a built-in advantage. Again, this is in my sort of limited opinion, but separate from one's level of income and their effort as well. And, Peggy McIntosh published an essay in 1988 called White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, which kind of frames very much where the discussions are now around white privilege. And I think we also need to be aware that, it's a little bit more than that, and it's significantly more than that. It's not just about cosmetics and inconvenience. We also have to consider the origins of white privilege, and then obviously in our present day, the ability to influence systemic decisions. And it's both, it's a legacy, if you will, and a cause of racism, which we shouldn't forget as well. And I think it's important for us not to forget what white privilege really means. And it's cosmetic, it's historical, it's legacy, it's all of these things all together at one stage. And again, I think trying to unpack that is still going to be a critical juncture point for white educators, if we want to be quite blunt about it, in their work in terms of anti-racist or anti-bias in their work, and in terms of offering broader recognition in that regard as well. But recognition is the key word here, and I'd just like to finish with a quote by Corey Collins, who says, when we're talking about societies and trying to tackle issues of privilege and recognizing previous injustices and so on, speaks of a recognition that does not silence the voices of those most affected by white privilege, a recognition that does not ignore where it comes from and why it has staying power. And again, just to both our presenters tonight, to Lucious, who's already left, and the rest of our team that have put together today's evening's presentation, thank you very much. And we look forward, as you pointed out, Will, to continue engaging with discussions around this, and certainly are available to make more time with this. So thank you to both.